So this is going to be kind of a lightning round of most popular questions that I haven't answered so far. And the first one is, why don't you pet them? They obviously want to be petted since they rub up against the wall of the cage. That's just cruel not to give them affection. So there's a couple of things going on there. The the people who are constantly petting the cats and rubbing their hands all over the cats from inside the cages or outside of the cages, they do that for one reason. They want you to believe that they are special, that they have some kind of a bond that you don't have, so that you will look up to them as their hero because they have that special bond. There are a number of tricks that they use to make that happen, but the saddest one and the most popular one is they make the cats beg for food. Whenever the cats are coming up and rubbing up against the wire, they are looking to be fed. They want food, and these people will give them treats in order to get the cat to come over to them and act that way. I don't feed the cats here at Big Cat Rescue. I haven't fed the cats here since 1990 something. And it's because volunteers love to take care of the cats and feed the cats, and they want to have those kinds of relationships, although they're not allowed to touch them. And so that's not what's important to me. I don't need to make you think that I'm special and that I have some kind of magical powers because I can get a tiger to come over to the side of the cage. It's just an illusion, like everything else these people do. It's an illusion to make you think that they have some kind of special bond, and it's just not true. The other reason that we don't touch the cats is because that would be a really rude thing to do. This cat has been bred into life in a cage, and they have had everything that is magnificent about them taken away from them by being held captive for crimes they did not commit. And so for me or anybody else to come and put our hands all over that cat, they that would just be so rude. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Can you imagine being caged up and having people put their hands all over you? Somebody charging for people to put their hands all over you? That's just gross and rude. And then the last reason is it's stupid. People who do that lose their fingers. And you saw in the video that poor guy, Saf, lost his arm. And that happens frequently when people try to touch wild animals that are capable of ripping them to shreds. So we don't do that. And there's even a bigger reason for the animal not to allow that to happen. If anyone here were to be bitten or scratched by a cat, even if they didn't want it to happen, the Center for Disease Control could force me to kill that cat because that's the only way you can test them for rabies is to cut their head off and test their heads for rabies, their brains for rabies. And I'm never going to put a cat in a position where that could happen. So when people are saying that these people that are petting these cats or allowing contact with these cats are doing it for the cat's benefit, that's certainly not true. And it's not helping matters at all, because as long as people can touch these animals and pet them and get what they want out of them, they're not going to do the important work of saving them in the wild, which is where they really belong and where we really need to focus all of this money and energy. So the second one is, you should breed in captivity. That is the only way to keep big cats from going extinct in the wild. That is not true. I think it's a myth that has been perpetuated on the public by the idea of cats in zoos being the Noah's Ark for maintaining genetic diversity in case we are ever able to save habitat, that we would then reintroduce those cats to the wild. We have enough genetic material of every endangered species on ice that they could clone those cats and bring them back if that's ever the case. You don't need to breed generation after generation of these cats for life in prison in order to someday repopulate the wild. And there's really no chance of doing that with a big cat. You might be able, like they have had success with these Iberian lynx, and they raise those cats in huge natural outdoor enclosures with little to no personal contact, and then they've been able to repopulate cats or repopulate places where the Iberian lynx used to live. But the lynx is a small cat, and it's not likely to kill a person or take a person's cow, and so people will more readily live with a small cat. They're not going to tolerate tigers running loose in their neighborhood, and there's just no program for releasing lions or tigers back to the wild. I know you may have seen something on Animal Planet. It was entertainment. It was not conservation. And if you go to any of the major conservation groups like Panthera or World Wildlife Fund or Humane Society International, any of those groups can tell you that none of these cats who are being bred for cub petting and for having cats in cages and zoos, none of those cats are serving any kind of conservation value and will never go free. Why don't you spend your money on cats in the wild instead of taking them from a cage at one place and putting them in a cage at your place? Actually, we do donate money to Cats in the Wild. For the last several years, we've donated over $100,000 a year doing that, but that's stopping the cub petting is the very first step that has to be taken in order to save the tiger in the wild. Back in 2011, Big Cat Rescue sat down at the table with World Wildlife Fund, the International Fund for Animal Welfare, Born Free, Animal Welfare Institute, Humane Society of the United States, and a dozen of us all together. And what we were trying to figure out is how to solve the big cat crisis. And at the end of our discussion, what we discovered is that there was a three-pronged process. And one of them was that we absolutely had to stop the cub petting, because the cub petting is what creates all of these tiger cubs and lion cubs and liger cubs who end up, as soon as they're about 12 weeks old, they can take the finger off of a small child, and now they go from being a moneymaker to being a huge liability. At that point, they are either killed, as you learned in TigerKing, through horrific ways like gas chambers and crushing them in the heads with hammers and freezing them to death and everything else that people do to these cubs in order to not have to take care of them for the rest of their lives. Or in some cases, they are sold as inappropriate pets that get to be too big. And in some cases, they end up in the illegal trade for their parts, for their teeth, their claws, their skins, their organs. And so it's that illegal trade when you are pumping so many cubs into it, and we estimate that there's over 200 cubs every year that are being pumped into this horrible situation. When you create that much opportunity for people to buy those parts, then it increases the demand for those parts. And people who think that those kinds of things have medicinal value will always want the premium product, the wild product. They don't want some inbred, captive bred animal. They want the one from the wild, where they believe it's the most powerful. And so by creating more demand for those parts, what you're doing is creating more pressure on the tiger in the wild. And we know that that's true because CITES, the Convention in International Trade in Endangered Species, when they get together, all of these nations come together and they decide on rules about how they're going to protect wildlife. And China always says, hey, don't look at us for farming our tigers for their parts. You guys don't even know where your tigers are. So that's why it is so important to stop the cub handling, and why that is driving the extinction of the tiger in the wild. We have no credibility to ask China to change anything as long as we're allowing people to be pumping out all of these cubs for this cub handling industry. The next one is along the same lines. I have always wanted to pet a cub, and I don't see why that's so wrong. I don't know how anybody could look at how those cubs were taken away from their mothers, dragged across that gravelly floor with a metal hook while the mother was still in labor, and say, I want to pet that cub. That just tells me an awful lot about you. That is just so disgusting. Now, I know in the past people didn't know, and they were being lied to and told it was for conservation, and they thought they were doing something good. And I feel for you if you were taken advantage of that way. I know so many people who were. But now that you know, there shouldn't be anybody saying they still want to do that. And it's like that everywhere. There's no situation where that's not happening. If you close everyone else down, what will happen to your facility when there are no more big cats to bring in? Are you trying to close everyone else down so you were the only one in business with big cats? I can't believe how many people say that when we have said from the very beginning our primary goal is to put ourselves out of business. We don't think that there should be a need for places like Big Cat Rescue to rescue wildcats from horrible situations. We need to just stop the horrible situations. And that's what we're doing. And that's what we're asking you to help us do. If we stop the cub handling, that's going to get rid of 90% of the problem out there. The big zoos will still breed cats, and even these nasty little roadside zoos can still breed cats if our federal bill passes. They just can't let people touch them. And if they aren't using them for that, 4 to 12 week period where people can touch them, if they're only breeding enough to have their little bratty zoo, that's not thousands of tigers suffering. It's a much lower number. So that's why our federal bill is so important. It's not going to put anybody out of business. It just means they can't do the most abusive thing that they do because it's the easiest way that they have found to make money. And our goal is to see that all of that abuse stops. The cats that we have will die out of old age. The cats that are in other good sanctuaries around the world, those cats will eventually die out of old age. And then I think people will actually care about protecting the tiger in the wild. I think it's too easy for people to go pay their $5 or their $10, or too easy for people to go pay to see a cat in a cage and not do the things necessary to support them in the wild. And so if you get rid of all of those opportunities for people to see them in cages, and the only way they can see them is in the wild, they're going to do that. And I know some people say, well, I could never travel to Africa or Asia or Brazil or Belize or any other place that these wildcats live. And I understand that. But we have such an opportunity now with virtual reality. And Big Cat Rescue has been on the leading edge of trying to create these virtual experiences so that you can just put on a headset and go there. And you can go there anytime you want. And my vision of a future world where we protect these habitats is that we lace natural areas with a grid of these 360 motion censored cameras that are constantly monitoring every beautiful thing that is happening in nature and streaming that to the internet, so that any given time you can put on your headset and you can be transported to anywhere around the world that has these cameras set up, and you can see those animals behaving how they should be and doing what's natural for them. That's the kind of world where we can really protect our planet, we save our entire life support system, and no animals have to be harmed in the process. That's where we need to be focusing our attention.